judging by this photograph.
Yes.
So let's say what we know is that from that drain pipe
Right.
to that corner there,
Right.
we know that that at least is the building that the land registry still has Tabaxman
Right.
as the name under which this building is
Right,
owned.
right.
So we're not going in, but how much would you say approximately?
This kind of building would be worth in the vicinity of about 7 million United States dollars.
$7 million.
About $7 million, yes.
So that's a fair amount of money. As an estate agent, how do you feel about the fact that Morris feels he should have this property back?
Well, I don't blame the man for obviously wanting to receive back what was taken from his grandparents and
His father, in
his
fact.
father, in fact, yes. But in relation to what would happen if we tried to give everything back to the previous owners, it is estimated about 60 billion PLN, which is 21 billion United States dollars worth of property, which was obviously nationalized. It would definitely, undoubtedly, it would put the Poland to its knees. We could put a huge, a cross on Poland and say amen.
But is the lack of a restitution law in Poland just about money, or is it something more sinister?
Jews out, swastika, swastika, swastika.
Anti-Semitic graffiti at this Jewish cemetery on the outskirts of Warsaw could lead you to think that nothing has changed in Poland for 70 years. The cemetery was first desecrated by the Nazis, and it continues to be vandalised to this day.
I'm taken aback by the sheer surreality of the site. It's so big, so much of it. A graveyard is a memorial, an indicator of individual lives lived, that each of these people lived an individual life and their death is a marker of the fact of that life. And I think that gets under the skin of genocidists, whatever, if that's a word, of people who want to say these lives are irrelevant and they can be wiped out in their millions because they are of no value, no worth, and no record needs to be kept of them. And thus they hate graveyards of Jews and they want to see them like this.
But I wondered whether the kind of attitudes I'd seen displayed in the cemetery actually played a role in preventing people like Morris Tabaxman getting their property back. So I went to see the editor of Poland's only Jewish magazine, Konstanty Gerbert.
I kind of wanted to know whether there are any outstanding examples of an anti-Semitic attitude towards restitution.
Well, plenty. The point is that in this particular context, anti-Semitism is not the reason of the problem. It's an aggravating circumstance, but the reasons are elsewhere. No, first of all, there is not much political support in Poland for restituting anything, because people will say, okay, the communists robbed this guy of his set of apartment blocks. That's horrible. They robbed my father, who was deported to Siberia for 20 years. I'm not getting compensated for that. So why should the Polish taxpayer, and practically everybody here, suffering one way or the other, contribute to compensate one group of people, right? Second, obviously, if those people no longer reside in Poland, there is a sense that, well, they've made their lives elsewhere. Probably they had better lives than we who stayed. So there isn't much great feeling of obligation towards them. And then thirdly, anti-Semitism helps in this particular case.
Money, politics, and to some extent anti-Semitism have all blocked restitution here in Poland. Konstanty left me wondering whether people like Morris Tabaxman would ever see any kind of compensation.
The complexity of this issue is so enormous, and there are so many levels of right and wrong, and so many people competing for what they feel is their justice. And yet, I think about Morris Tabaxman at home, and I think he would think all this was bollocks. I think from his point of view, and other survivors' point of view, they're not interested in this complexity. I think for Holocaust survivors, complexity is a form of denial.
By now, I had found myself becoming so obsessed by all this talk of restitution and Polish property law that I even ended up talking about it whilst watching an England game in a bar in Warsaw. The Englishman I'm talking to, by the way, also just happens to own a disputed apartment.
It might be wrong here, but almost definitely he will have at some point owned 100% of the property. It will have been nationalised by the government and they've now sold it to you.
Yeah, one would assume so, yeah.
Right.
But it's,
Cheers. So as I was saying, you live in a flat that was basically robbed. The Jew was robbed by the Nazis. How do you feel about that?
The next day, I went for a walk in what had once been the Warsaw Ghetto.
Thanks. Can I have some dumplings? Does that come with that?
Rather surprisingly, given that the vast majority of Polish Jews never survived the war, I found this area had been given over to a Jewish street festival.
Jewish enough for you?
But it wasn't quite what it seemed. Spot the only authentic Jew here. Me. All the others are non-Jewish actors. There are only fragments of a Jewish community left in Poland, but the Jews here are fighting a comeback. And they're doing it armed with the one law that does return Jewish property to its former owners. It's a law designed to return communal property, like synagogues, schools, hospitals, and cemeteries. Even with this law, though, getting anything out of the authorities is still incredibly complicated. To begin with, few Jewish buildings are still standing. This building, for example, is now on the site of what was one of the biggest synagogues in the city. The chairman of the Jewish community, Piotr Kadalczyk, explained to me how on earth restitution can happen in a situation like this.
of course, we cannot claim the building, but we can claim some certain compensation for the fact that it's built on the top of our land. So this...
I see, there is compensation for...
In this particular case, yes. We have received 2 floors in a building, which we are now managing, and this is, at the moment, I would say, one of our major sources of income.
Do you rent those floors out? Or
Yes,
do you... Oh, I see.
Absolutely.
I see. So it's become... You have to sort of become property managers to,
Of course.
with restitution.
Yes.
Right.
Now, each of our successes on a property management translates itself to the specific things that we can do, either for the people, either for our welfare system, for appointing another rabbi, for restoration of other cemetery, for painting over the synagogue, and so on and so on. So, you know, I remember times quite well when the monthly budget of the community was about 3,000 Polish zlotys, which is now about $1,000. Entire budget for the entire community.
So the budget used to be $1,000. What is the budget now?
About 5 million zlotys.
While that is great, does it not involve any kind of discomfort? And this is an unfair judgment, but it's I have this thing which is an anti-Semitic radar, what the anti-Semites are going to make of this kind of process. And I think what they will make of this process is that here are the Jews making money. This is what they do, the Jews make money, and they make money at our expense.
I would say I don't care. I mean, we are in the process of rebuilding community, and we are, I would say, quite successful. So simply, once it translates into the well-being of the community, I don't care.
Rebuilding a community seems to me a very good use for restitution. It was good, for once, to hear someone who was thinking about the future rather than the past. I'd met so many people on this journey, and they all had their different reasons for fighting for restitution. Memory, justice, community, all vital, all important. But there was a small part of me that thought, memory, schmemory. Justice, schmustis. Community, you get the point. There's one reason that everyone's avoiding. Well, nearly everyone.
It is about memory, it is about honouring the dead, and vindicating their lives. But it is also about money. And anyone who doesn't recognize that or accept it is, I think, bullshitting themselves. It's not dirty money. It's money that has been stolen. And when it is returned, there's nothing dirty about it. It's clean. So I don't have a problem with that.
And you know what? At the end of this whole thing, I don't think I do either.
One thing I think which is maybe different for me at the end than at the beginning is that early on I talked to you about my anti-Semitic radar being up about all this and about my fears that anti-Semites can sort of make capital out of the fact that Jews are receiving money, however just that money coming back to them might be. And then when I spoke to Pietro, and he just said incredibly vehemently, he said it twice, I don't care. I don't care. And I really felt the sense of the irrelevance of what the anti-Semites think. And it is a really difficult moral issue. It is a really complex process, but I think the thing that doesn't matter about the whole process is what the anti-Semites think.
So that's it really. Those are my big thoughts on this big subject. But I have to tell you that by now, I was seriously thinking about my own family's little slice of the restitution pie. By now, I was thinking we got more than shortchanged for our brick factory in Königsberg/Kaliningrad. And I was thinking, show me the money. Instead, I was shown a fax from the Russian authorities.
It's very funny that you've got a fax which does in fact relate to my life in a strange way, which has got a long explanation of what was settled at the Potsdam Conference in 1945. And basically it lays out what was decided at the Potsdam Conference, which is that Königsberg would become part of Russia, would become Kaliningrad. That was agreed by the President of the United States and the British Prime Minister, so Roosevelt and Churchill both made it absolutely clear that there was nothing coming to me or my mum. And it was fixed in international conventions. There are no cases in which Jewish or other citizens who lived in former Königsberg in the area adjacent to it have been compensated. Now, what is very important there is the phrase, there are no cases in which Jewish or other citizens, i.e., we are not making any distinction between Jews and anyone else who lived in Königsberg. As far as we're concerned, they were all Germans. They raped our country, we took Königsberg and called it Kaliningrad. So fuck off.